Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our brand new study in The Future of Theology, Essays to Honor Jürgen Moltmann, edited by Volf, published by Erdman's Publishing in 1996. We're going to begin with essay number 1, pages 3 to 12, by Reiser on Challenges to the Churches. So these are essays in honor of Jürgen Moltmann, and begin here with block 1 on the ideology of progress. We are faced with accelerated population growth, food shortages, and accelerated climate change. We must find ways to make human life sustainable. And that will include addressing the spiritual and the moral dimensions of humanity. Note 2, the Enlightenment brought the interdependence of Greek philosophy and Christian faith, and as a result, nature became a resource to be exploited. The self was put into the center of creation with a role to rule the earth. The ideology of progress through science and technology emerged. So this ideology of progress, it became the expression of biblical eschatology. But there's a destructive side to this philosophy of progress. The anthropocentric foundation neglected the regenerating life cycles of nature itself. The industrial mode of production disrupted the ecosphere. So under this disruption, there's a great need to establish structures of economic justice and redefine political relationships between northern and southern countries. We face global ecological threats. We need to respect the ideological boundaries and not overstep those boundaries. A change of consciousness has to emerge. A change of spiritual consciousness has to emerge that addresses the sustainable relationship between human community and natural environment. I might qualify that as created natural environment. That takes us on to block 2. Now in block 2, we come across a word that needs to be discussed, and it's the English word is Hegemony, and there's no clear way to pronounce it. There's disagreement, but it really comes from the Greek hegemonia, and hegemonia means domination. So it's from the Greek hegemonia, but to pronounce it, a lot of people prefer to pronounce the G as DZ, hegemony. I'm going to use the G as a DZ and use that pronunciation. So block 2 is going to address from hegemony to plurality, from hegemony domination to plurality. Hegemony equals the dominance of one nation or society over all others. The last struggle for hegemony was between the United States and the Soviet Union, but we have reached the point where we can posit, have we reached the point where we can posit a new state of plurality, of authentic plurality? The network of communication creates an artificial semblance of unified culture, and the internet has contributed to that semblance of unified culture. But the emergence of militant fundamentalism has sought to resist any hegemonic claims. And we have Islam fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, any fundamentalist group, atheist fundamentalism. They all fight to resist any hegemonic claims. Note 2, resistance against hegemonic claims. Fundamentalism also negates the idea of plurality as well. The fact of human interdependence can never be removed. Humanity must develop ways to acknowledge authentic plurality, underline that word authentic, with a communicative cooperation. And that challenges our spiritual orientation. We are challenged to spiritual orientation. Globalization is challenging the traditional forms of the organization of society and of the exercise of power. We must negate the notion of treating the earth as resource and for accumulating power, because many persons end up being condemned to the fringes of humanity. So let's take a look at Block 2, Note 4, the challenge to the exercise of power. We must reaffirm the distinction between creator and creature by taking up the perspective of the whole that is in God. Transformation demands that we recover the sustainable limits of human existence. That takes us on to Note 5. Human existence means being in relationship. The self's identity is acquired by shaping relationship with other selves through a kenotic shaping, a agape self-giving type of love, kenotic shaping. Christ is the center of every authentic relationship. We seek to build mutually supportive links, which will heal fragmentation, and that equals irene, peace. So, the failure that we have is that there's the failure of the Block 1, the imprint of the ideology of progress being taken up by the church, and that would be a failure, that would be a false image. That has been the problem of the 19th and 20th century, is this face of an ideology of progress imprinting the church. Additionally, we have to pass through negation. We have to negate hegemony, and we have to affirm authentic plurality. Underline authentic plurality. Christocentric plurality. Now we move on to Block 3. We're going to take a look at the new face of the church that should be taken up. Christianity is giving way to new expressions of the Christian faith. Pentecostalism is emerging in Latin America, and these emerging churches everywhere have a post-Constantinian consciousness. However, the percentage of Christians in the world has not changed significantly. Christianity remains a minority. Islam is dominant. Christianity remains a minority. We don't think of that very often, but Christianity as minority religion. Note 2. A wide network of inter-church relationship has emerged. However, fundamentalists oppose this ecumenism. This is because this is a very distinctive form of universality in the Christian church. It's if you want to just take up the metaphor, it's a narrow universality. It's the narrow way of a very unique form of universality, which does not merely accept plurality. Catholicity posits that the fullness of God's presence is experienced within every Christ-centered local community. So the church has for the church and its new face, it has a very distinctive form of universality. The tension between local and universal church must be transformed in its relationship. And here's the key point, where the universal church is abbreviated under the local church. Then the local church takes up an ecumenical character as interrelated with all other local communities. In other words, we begin with Christopraxis at the local level. So it's a transformed ecumenical character. Christian mission needs to be reassessed by negating the ideas of trying to establish Christian hegemony, recognizing God's saving presence over creation, and recognizing God's option for the poor, a mission that follows the way of Christ. We know that to be mandatory. So let's take a look at 3:5. It's a kenotic way of fruit bearing that we take up, passing through the negation of hegemony and exclusivism, transitioning from an anthropocentric spirituality to a life-centered spirituality, with a real interpretation of history and eschatology that are entirely new, no longer separating creation from redemption. In other words, allowing redemption to be considered as panentheism within creation. So, we conclude with uniting creation and redemption. Human salvation must be abbreviated under the perspective of a new heaven and a new earth. That is the new holistic perspective, through the interrelationship between humanity, nature, and God, needing a new balance between the needs of human survival and human integrity, establishing new Christocentric forms or Christopraxis forms of living as Christocentric. And that is exactly what Moltmann would propose. He would propose a Christopraxis type of form that becomes concrete and then is posited as mission. But we have to be involved in mission to learn and to gain greater depth of understanding through the surplus of promise. That surplus of promise confronts us in external reality. That surplus of promise confronts us in Scripture. That surplus of promise confronts us in the realm of positing when we're getting ready to step out in mission. And all of that speaks to the ongoing giving of a new face to the church, negating the ideology of progress, negating hegemony domination, and constituting a very unique and a very authentic Christ-centered type of plurality. All of that has to come into play. So our recall triad basically gives us block 1 becomes a beginning of negation. We negate the subjective ideology of progress. As a member of the church and as the church as a whole, we cannot let the ideology of progress become that which imprints the intentionality of the church. Objectively, that means in block 2, when we go out of ourselves, we don't go out of ourselves in an attitude of domination, which would be hegemony. We negate that kind of objective domination perspective. We don't want to dominate others with our Christianity. That's not what it's about. But it is about authentic plurality, so we don't simply accept a pluralistic view. We critique that with the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we do have a real challenge to spiritual orientation, says Reiser in block 2, and real challenge to how the exercise of power will take place. We define new forms that are kenotic type shaping of our positing of the kingdom. It takes on an objective kenotic shaping. That subjective negation of an ideology, that objective shaping of a new shape, kenotic shaping to ministry, will result in giving the church a new face that unites creation and redemption and takes up the panentheistic position of Jürgen Moltmann, which is a holistic position, a holistic perspective that begins with the praxis ground-based local churches. So we get a great beginning here to this collection of essays. This was Challenges to the Churches by Reiser, page 3 to page 12. That's going to wrap up essay number 1. And we will, in free recall triad, you had the subjectivity of ideology in block 1 and the objectivity of hegemony being negated in block 2, resulting in a synthesis of a newly imprinted motivational base for the church, a new face, imprinted with the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That'll wrap up this lesson. We'll pick up our next lesson as essay number 2 next time.